Hello beautiful people, welcome to an episode on TOPWAR. Why not? Because we have a very strong reason, which is the new Air Force hero, Mr. Jett. And in this episode, I'm gonna give you my approach on Mr. Jett. We're also gonna talk about what possible combinations are with Mr. Jett. How would these matches look like? But what's also super important, you're gonna have to pay attention in which order you should use Mr. Jett in that specific match. So obviously, you guys have already noticed, this is a support hero just like Mr. Abad, which I have here on the screen. And these two heroes are kind of the same, though a little bit different at the same time. Which means, in other words, a summary of Mr. Jett is a support hero exclusively for the Air Force, which applies ignitions but also increases the value of this ignition, while Mr. Abad is actually detonating those ignitions. And we obviously gonna talk about a very interesting setup, which means using Abad and using Jett together in the same match and actually skipping the indestructible hero, because you know from the support hero that this HP increase actually stack with each other till the end of the battle. And the indestructible buff, it is only for the 2 rounds plus the 3rd round, which is going to be a very weaker value. So let's dive into this hero. And this hero active skill has 2 components. So the first component is actually going to attack all the slots of your opponent, dealing just a 50% damage. And then on top of this, he's going to apply an ignition and some other interesting stuff. So in the second part is if the target is affected by ignition, and in most of the cases they will gonna be, there is a chance to apply 1 more stack of ignition to a random enemy, I presume close to the target. But this hero has also a passive skill which will gonna increase the value of this ignition. We're gonna talk about this in a second, and these values can get even higher when you have a look at the level 5 exclusive skill, which definitely looks like a must-have. So what's the passive skill? At the end of each round, it will increase the ignition effect based on the number of ignition stacks resolved this round. So every 5 resolved ignition stacks increase the ignition damage by 5%, and it goes all the way up to 15%. And here is the small catch here, because if you are using heroes like Mr. Abad, but also like Asuka for example, those heroes can detonate those ignition far before they are actually activated, and those ignition detonated will not count towards this passive skill. It's a super important thing to pay attention to. Obviously also we see that this hero is a war-based hero, so the war stats will gonna increase the HP boost. So for every 100 war points, you're gonna get a 0.04% HP boost. That's a good thing. And now let's jump into these very interesting exclusive skills of Mr. Jett. Obviously, we're gonna skip the level 3 exclusive skill because it always looks the same. And let's have a closer look at the level 5 exclusive skill. So at the start of each round, on top of everything, Mr. Jett will gonna apply a 50% ignition on 3 random enemies. But now this passive effect, which can go from 5% all the way up to 15% without the exclusive skill, will now go from minimum 20% all the way up to 60%, and that is huge. That's 4 times bigger. Obviously, the level 7 of this skill we have to mention because it's also super interesting, but it also has a catch, people. So first of all, obviously the ignition effects will be enhanced by another 40%, and on top of this, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, this hero's active skill has 2 components. One, which is hitting all 9 slots, doing 50% damage on each, and the other one is the ignition. Well, the level 7 will actually going to increase this base damage, which is 50% by default, by another 70%, which is absolutely huge, but there is a catch. The targets must be affected by ignition. In other words, again, having heroes in our match like Asuka and Abad, which detonates those ignitions, will gonna reduce the value of this skill actually. So how should a match look like for the Air Force? Let's start with what is possible right now and what's actually the best. And this is gonna be a match which is gonna look something like this. Now, obviously an offense buffing hero, you can use Bradley, you can use Tigress, both work. Then If you want to go the conservative way, you're going to take a hero with the indestructible buff. And here you see me using Storm Shadow, but obviously you can use other heroes like Striker, like Duke, but obviously we really have to mention Vivian here, which is the newest hero with indestructible buff for the Air Force, something like this. And then you have Abbat last. Why is the reason this order makes sense? You want to have as many ignitions as possible activated, while Abbat will gonna detonate them. And this will gonna work in the same way with Mr. Jett, because I'm gonna leave this slot here open. So you're gonna have these two heroes, the offense buffing hero and the indestructible hero, and then as a third hero, you would like to have Jett. Now, before we move to how a match would look like if you would like to use Abbat and Jett in the same match, let me mention something super important. Now, the ignition effect itself is absolutely fine from my perspective, because if the ignition is applied on the slot from which your opponent is about to hit, that ignition, that specific damage will gonna apply first, which will gonna reduce the amount of troops on that slot, which means your opponent will gonna do slightly less damage because he has slightly less units on that match. So the ignition is not like the magnetic pulse, which the effect, the way it is designed, it actually requires heroes like Neely or Binary in order to detonate that effect, in order for that slot to take the damage, in order for the opponent to have less units to do less damage on me. So from this perspective, the ignition is absolutely awesome, and both setups will gonna work. We're gonna have to test to see which one is gonna be stronger, with Abbat or with Jett. But there is also this possibility I want to highlight. You can use Abbat and Jett together, but in which order should you do that? And it's going to look something like this. And why? You're going to have some ignitions applied from Tigress or Brady. You're going to have some ignition, but Abbat will also going to detonate some of them, but some ignition will going to remain not detonated, and then you can improve that with having Jett on the third slot. This is the way I see it when it comes down to Abbat, and of course Jett with level 5 exclusive skill, in order to take the maximum advantage of the passive skill and not reduce its meaning, because of Abbat or Asuka detonates those ignitions. But when we have a look at this hero from the level 7 perspective, I think it's very safe to say that having heroes like Asuka, having heroes like Abbat, which detonates some of the ignitions, will actually reduce the value slightly of the level 7 if you choose to get Jett at level 7. So from the level 7 perspective, it's actually going to be the safest way to go with an offense buffing hero, a hero with indestructible buff, and then Jett as last. So beautiful people, let's also have a look at the developer's roadmap. It's always super interesting. And what you're seeing here, no surprise, of course, we're going to have an alternative to Quilly, which of course we're going to have to test it, no stress there. We also know that we're going to get an alternative to Meowzilla, which is a very powerful hero and a strong alternative setup for the Navy. And what's super interesting, we're gonna have an alternative to Tigress, which is, from my perspective, dear beautiful people, absolutely justified, because especially for the newer players, they no longer have the chance to get Tigress because River Game is not able to bring the Kung Fu Panda, most likely. Therefore, it's absolutely justified to have an alternative to Tigress, and we're gonna test it to see if there are some noticeable differences between the Tigress and the new hero. And with that being said, beautiful people, first I would like to point out that I'm going to be in holidays between the 17th and 27th of May, which is around about 10 days. And when I will be back, yeah, we're going to see on which path exactly this YouTube channel will going to take. It's always obviously based on the amount of people watching these videos, making me understand indirectly it is actually still worth to do this type of videos on TOPWAR. So as always, beautiful people, it's always worth it to support what supports you back, because it doesn't cost you anything. So yeah, subscribe to this channel, watch the videos till the end, share this channel with your friends. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think about my evaluation, and of course what you think about this new hero Jett. And I'm gonna catch you in the next one. Ciao, ciao, ciao.